I told my autistic brother the truth when he asked me why women don't like him. My brother Jake has always been different. He's got autism, and he's never really understood social cues the way most people do. Growing up, I watched him struggle with friendships and especially with girls. He'd do things like stand too close when talking, or launch into these super detailed explanations about trains or whatever he was obsessed with that week without reading the room. By the time he hit college, Jake was getting frustrated. Really frustrated. He'd see other guys getting girlfriends and going on dates, and he couldn't figure out what he was doing wrong. He started asking me about it constantly. Why don't girls want to hang out with me? Why do they always make excuses when I ask them out? What am I missing? For months, I gave him the usual stuff. Just be yourself. The right person will come along. You're a great guy. But honestly, I was lying. Because the truth was, Jake did have some habits that made dating really hard for him. He'd interrupt people mid-sentence to correct them about random facts. He'd show up to dates wearing the same wrinkled shirt he'd been wearing for 3 days. He had this nervous laugh that he'd do at completely wrong times, like when someone was being serious. The breaking point came when Jake told me about this girl Emma from his computer science class. He'd been trying to ask her out for weeks, and she kept saying she was busy. Jake was convinced she was just playing hard to get. He had this whole plan to surprise her at her dorm with flowers and ask her to be his girlfriend. I knew this was going to be a disaster. Emma had been polite, but clearly wasn't interested, and showing up at her dorm uninvited was going to freak her out. But Jake was so excited about his plan. He'd bought these expensive roses and everything. That night, he came back to our apartment completely crushed. Apparently, Emma had answered the door, taken one look at him and the flowers, and told him straight up that she wasn't interested and that he needed to stop following her around campus. Her roommate had even come to the door and told Jake to leave or they'd call security. Jake was sitting on our couch just staring at the wall. He looked at me and said, "I don't get it. What is wrong with me? Why doesn't anyone want me?" I'd been having this internal debate for months about whether to be honest with him. Part of me thought it would be cruel, but seeing him so defeated, I realized that tiptoeing around the truth wasn't helping him at all. It was actually making things worse because he kept making the same mistakes over and over. So I sat down next to him and said, "Jake, do you really want to know? Because I can tell you, but it might be hard to hear." He nodded, so I took a deep breath and laid it all out. I told him that showing up at someone's dorm uninvited with flowers after they'd already said no multiple times wasn't romantic, it was scary. I explained that when someone says they're busy 3 times in a row, they're usually trying to let you down easy. I told him that interrupting people constantly and correcting them made conversations feel exhausting instead of fun. I also mentioned the hygiene stuff, how he'd wear the same clothes for days, how his breath was usually pretty bad because he forgot to brush his teeth, how he'd pick at his skin during conversations. I explained that first impressions matter, and that taking care of yourself shows respect for the other person. The hardest part was explaining the social stuff, how his nervous laugh made people uncomfortable because it came at weird times, how launching into 20-minute explanations about programming languages on a first date wasn't building connection, how standing too close made people feel trapped instead of interested. Jake was quiet for a long time after I finished. I was worried I'd been too harsh, but then he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me this before?" I explained that most people don't want to hurt someone's feelings, so they make polite excuses instead of being direct. But that had left him confused and frustrated because he couldn't figure out what was going wrong.